Hi everyone, and welcome to the first video in a new series on the greatest games in the history of chess. I haven't decided completely on which games I'm going to use, so if you have any suggestions, please feel free to make recommendations in the comments section below. To get the ball rolling, I thought we'd look at a game that's known as Rubinstein's Immortal. It was played between George Rotlewi and Akiba Rubinstein at a tournament in Poland in 1907. Rotlewi, or Rotlevi, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, is not as famous as Rubinstein, but he was certainly a noted chess master of the early 20th century, with wins against Nimzowitsch and others, so certainly a force to be reckoned with. Akiba Rubinstein, on the other hand, is famous within chess history for many reasons. Even today's top players like Kasparov and Kramnik have a deep admiration for his play, in particular his endgame skill. He was one of the first grandmasters to consider potential endgames right from the opening of the game, and numerous opening variations are named after him. To get into this game anyway, Rotlevi had white and opened with d4, after which came d5, which is, a standard queen's pawn game, and after knight f3, e6, e3, c5, c4, and knight c6, it's transposed to the Tarrasch defense of the queen's gambit declined. Play continued with one of the many book lines, knight c3 and knight f6, both players electing to maintain the tension in the center for as long as possible, and Rotlevi electing not to inflict an isolated pawn on Rubinstein on several occasions there. Here, however, he finally broke the central tension with d takes c5, and Rubinstein answered, of course, with the bishop takes c5, which is won a tempo, and this is one of the reasons why it's unwise to break the central tension so early in such a way. The move d takes c5 is a pawn capture. In order to make that capture, the pawn has to move for a second time to capture a pawn that's only moved once. So there's a loss of tempo involved, and if we look at the board now, we can see that due to this loss of tempo, it appears that Rubinstein has had 5 moves, whereas Rotlevi is about to make his 5th move. So, in a sense, white has relinquished his advantage in having the first move, and black can more or less already claim equality in this position as a result. And Rotlevi continued with a3, which is preparing a queenside demonstration where white now has a pawn majority, and this makes more sense than developing the bishop on f1, because Rotlevi is waiting for a later d takes c4, so he can play bishop takes c4 in 1 move and thus avoid the loss of tempo involved if he plays it in 2 moves. And the battle for this tempo is a standard feature of many Queen's Gambit declined games. Rubinstein answered in suit with a6, gaining space on the queen's side, and Rotlevi continued on the queen's side with b4, gaining a tempo on the bishop. So now bishop d6, and now he developed his dark square bishop with bishop b2, which is aiming, of course, for pressure down the long diagonal. And Rubinstein now castled, and Rotlevi played the curious queen d2, perhaps hoping to play rook d1 and aiming for pressure down the d-file. Interestingly, this move was criticized at the time by several analysts of the game, but it's the top move given by Fritz on shallow depth, so it can't be that bad. Good alternatives, according to the analysts of the day, were c takes d5, followed up with bishop d3, or queen c2, simply, instead of d takes c5, c takes d5. And those were given by the analysts of the day, which was Karl Schlechter and Saveli Tarkatower. And after this move, queen d2, you'll see in a moment why it's considered not to be best, although Fritz does recommend it. Rubinstein continued with queen e7, which allows for rook d8, and that will take aim at this at the queen on d2. And this is effectively a pawn sacrifice. He's offering a pawn to Rotlewi for active play, which was rightly praised by the analysts of the day, and Rotlewi declined it with bishop d3, but this was a suboptimal move and gives black a slight edge. Better simply it was c takes d5, followed up with bishop e2, or the accepting of the pawn sacrifice was c takes d5, where white can defend with perfect play after e takes d5, knight takes d5, knight takes d5, queen takes d5, and rook d8, which is the idea of the pawn sacrifice, to generate a powerful attack while white remains uncastled and under a lot of tactical pressure. And the only move here is pretty much queen b3, and now black can try either bishop e6 or bishop g4, with some but not total compensation for the sacrificed pawn. But anyway, back to the game continuation. Rotlewi has just played bishop d3, and Rubinstein continued with d takes c4, bishop takes c4, b5, getting a tempo on the bishop, so bishop d3, and now rook d8, taking aim at the queen and causing Rotlewi enough difficulties that he decided to move it for a second time in the opening, this time to e2. And this loss of tempo is one of the reasons why the analysts of the day, Schlechter and Tartikauer, thought the plan with queen d2 earlier was incorrect, and it's fair to say that their conclusions are accurate. Rubinstein continued now with bishop b7, and if we take a quick look at the position, we can see that he is reaping the rewards of accurate play in the opening. The pawn structure, queen and minor piece setups are the same on both sides, but thanks to Rubinstein's winning of 2 tempi, he's been able to castle, first of all, and also play rook d8, taking control of the now open file, and this lead in development confers a good edge in the position. And Rotlewi now caught up a little by castling, but thanks to his lead in development, Rubinstein is now able to take the initiative with knight e5 and gain a very nicely posted central knight. And Rotlewi can simply exchange it off, of course, which he did with knight takes e5. So after bishop takes e5, it's a bishop on e5 that shows black's advantage in his position, and there's a threat now of bishop takes h2 check, and after king takes h2, queen d6 check, and then queen takes d3, which is going to win a pawn. And as well as that, there's awkward tactical pressure on the c3 knight here, combined with the pressure down the d file. Bishop takes c3, bishop takes c3, and there's dangers that a piece can be lost here. And so in order to prevent the winning of this pawn here on h2, Rotlewi was compelled to play the weakening f4. And after bishop c7, he played e4, which gains some space and tries to gain some central initiative and play himself, but black is still better here, and Rubinstein now got his only inactive piece into the fray with the rook ac8, and total control now of both open files, as well as pressure on the white center, in particular the e4 pawn, which Rotlewi now chose to resolve with e5, apparently gaining space with tempo, but this is a weak move that gives black a significant edge. Instead of advancing these pawns and creating weaknesses, white should have been challenging black's overall positional control, in particular along the c and d files, or at least making his position more solid. This kind of play is ill-advised according to most schools of thought, i.e. you should not attack until you have a positional advantage, and certainly not when you have a positional disadvantage, as Rotlewi did when he embarked on this ill-advised space-gaining exercise. Rubinstein now exploits this unwise advance and inaccurate opening play with expert precision. First he played bishop b6 check, with, one could argue, perfectly placed bishops for attacking the white king, to go along with the perfectly placed rooks here on the c and d files. And after king h1, Rubinstein found the only move to maintain an edge, and if you want to try and spot it, then stop the video now. Knight g4 is the move, and already black's attack is becoming decisive. Any other move, for example knight d5, and black's attack peters out quickly. After knight g4, there are too many tactical threats to deal with. Rotlewi tried bishop e4, but this is not good enough, and in actual fact it seems that white is already busted and that there is no reasonable defense. For example, if instead queen takes g4, now rook takes d3, threatening rook d2 and taking on g2 with the bishop, is winning at the very least 2 minor pieces for his rook here, and black's attack will rage on afterwards. Another try is bishop takes h7 check, using the pressure on the loose knight here to win a pawn, because after king takes h7 there's queen takes g4, but black is still winning now with the rook d2, which is forking the bishop and the g2 pawn and creating an easily winning attack. Alternative defenses are weaker and not really worth considering, and it's remarkable that Rubinstein is able to create such a crushing attack with only 2 extra tempi so soon out of the opening, and it's mostly his superbly placed bishops that are making this possible. Okay, back to the game continuation. Bishop e4 is what Rotlewi has just played, and Rubinstein continues with queen h4, bringing his queen into the attack and surely spelling doom for Rotlewi, who is now faced with mate on h2, which he countered with g3, which was not the best defense. Better, but still losing, was h3, where black continues his attack with the rook takes c3, and best play goes bishop takes c3. Oops, sorry, rook takes c3, and best play goes bishop takes c3. If instead bishop takes b7, now comes a mate in 3, with the rook takes h3 check, g takes h3, queen takes h3. Only moves queen h2, and now queen takes h2 is mate. And also, if instead of bishop takes c3, queen takes g4, now rook takes h3 check is again totally crushing. After queen takes h3, queen takes h3, g takes h3, bishop takes e4 check. Best play goes rook f3. It's the only other move is rook f2, which leads to a mate in 7. But now black has simply bishop takes f3, king h2, and rook d2 check, which is of course completely winning. So the best line after h3 is rook takes c3, bishop takes c3, and then bishop takes e4 is now winning for black, because after queen takes g4, black has queen takes g4, and after h takes g4, rook d3 attacks the bishop on c3 and also threatens rook h3, which is mate, because the g2 pawn is pinned, and thus the bishop is lost and black has a one end game. But Rotlewi missed this defense and he played g3 instead, to which Rubinstein played a brilliant move. If you want to try and spot it, then stop the video now. Rook takes c3 is the move, which is an incredible queen sacrifice, and there are several ideas at work here. One of them is to knock out the defender of the bishop e4, and also to threaten rook takes g3 with a winning attack. And needless to say, white is completely lost here, and Rotlewi made it worse by accepting the queen with g takes h4, which allows a mate in 8, although it's incredibly hard to calculate over the board. He had to play instead bishop takes b7 to try and hold out for as long as possible, but black is still a long way ahead after rook takes g3, which is a devastating blow. But Rubinstein is not finished yet with the fireworks. After his queen sacrifice, g takes h4, has just been played by Rotlewi. There is again only one move to maintain the attack. And again, if you want to try and spot it, then stop the video now. Rook d2 is the move that Rubinstein played, and the only move that maintains the winning attack, which offers a free rook, the move after giving up the queen. And the idea, of course, is to take out the final defender of the bishop on e4, which, if it is lost, will be curtains for white. And as I said, it's a forced mate from here anyway. If the queen moves off the second rank, then rook takes h2 is going to be mate, and all white can hope to do at this stage is delay the mate for as long as possible, and rook f2 here was the correct way to do that. And Rotlewi accepted the second sacrifice with queen takes d2, which makes it now a mate in 5. We can have a quick look at rook f2 instead. Best play goes bishop takes e4 check, and king g1 is the only move. If instead queen takes e4, then knight takes f2 check, king g2, sorry, and knight takes e4 with discovered check and mate in 4. So king g1, and now rook takes e2 will be played, and this rook is pinned, so the rook can't be captured back. And best play goes rook d1, but now simply rook takes b2 with mate in 3, and there's no rook d8. There's just bishop takes d8. So that was how rook f2 would have been refuted. But Rotlewi played queen takes d2. So now came bishop takes e4 from Rubinstein, and it's check, and there's only two ways out of it. Queen g2 is what Rotlewi played. Also possible was rook f3, but now simply bishop takes f3, queen g2, rook c2. There's no queen takes f3 because of rook takes h2 mate. So to delay mate for the longest, bishop d4 is best, but now simply bishop takes g2 check, forcing king g1, and bishop takes d4 is mate. So queen g2 is what Rotlewi played, and Rubinstein finished with a rook h3, simply threatening rook takes h2 mate, as we've seen, and against which there is no defense. The queen is pinned by the bishop, and taking the bishop does not stop the mate on h2. And if rook f3, simply bishop takes f3, and if rook f2, just bishop takes f2, and the queen cannot recapture thanks to the pin. And no matter what white plays, mate is coming on h2 in a maximum of 3 moves. So at this point, move number 25, Rotlewi resigned, seeing finally that there was no way to save the game, and it was an absolutely incredible win from Rubinstein, who, it should be noted, was generally a quiet player and would never have carried out such an attack if it wasn't 100% sound. And there are many who believe that he's one of the greatest players never to become world champion, and with calculating abilities like these, it's easy to see why. That's actually a good game to have a replay of, and we can have the threatened squares on as well, and we can just see it from Rotlewi's point of view, what it's like to face such an attack. So here we go. Yeah, Killegar Rubinstein is, as I said, widely considered one of the best players never to become world champion, and the reason for that was that in the years that he was playing, he had to have a significant amount of money in order to challenge the world champion, and he was never able to raise the funds, although he did nearly play Lasker once, but I believe the match was called off because of the start of World War One. And unfortunately later in life he suffered from schizophrenia, and had to give up chess when he was relatively young, I believe. but all these moves extremely precisely played by Rubinstein, especially rook takes c3 and rook d2 and knight g4, and the entire attack is beautifully played. And rook h3 is 25th move, making the game also a miniature. So it was just a fantastic game from Rubinstein, and hope you enjoyed it. Please leave any comments or thoughts. Thanks very much.